A 20-year-old Hindu female patient Kamala, a housewife staying in a village in Thane district, comes with complaints of a swelling in the neck since 2 years. The patient was apparently alright 2 years back when she first noticed a swelling in the middle of her neck to the right of the midline with no accompanying pain or fever. The swelling has gradually increased in size since then. No history of regression in size. Regression, which thyroid swelling regresses in size. Sir, the swelling produced by hemorrhage into a degenerated cystic nodule decreases in size over a few weeks and may even disappear completely. No history of regression in size, no history of rapid increase in the size of the swelling with pain, suggestive of hemorrhage into a pre-existing nodule or sometimes a malignant change. No history of appearance of new swellings elsewhere in the neck. There is no history suggestive of lymph node swelling. Regarding complications, no, wait. What history have you asked to rule out lymph node swelling? Sir, there is no history of discharge or sinus from the swelling. No history of evening rise of temperature, loss of weight, cough with expectoration and hemoptysis, or contact with a known case of tuberculosis. No history of swellings elsewhere in the body, bone pains or bleeding gums. No history of swelling in the oral cavity, dysphagia, dyspnea or change in voice. Very good. Now for the complications. There is no history of dysphagia, dyspnea or hoarseness of voice. No history of nocturnal dyspnea. No history of syncopal attacks. When is nocturnal dyspnea seen? Retrosternal goiter due to pressure on the trachea in recumbent position. No history of recent weight loss, bone pains, swellings on the scalp or lateral part of the neck, suggestive of metastasis from a malignant thyroid. No history of thyrotoxicosis, that is, no history of chest pain, palpitations or exertional dyspnea. Patient has not noticed any enlargement of the eyeballs. No history of tremors, excitability, insomnia or excessive sweating. No history of increased appetite with loss of weight. No history of diarrhea or menstrual disturbances. There is no history of edema of feet and face with hoarseness of voice and mental lethargy. Regarding etiology, at the onset there was no history of pain and fever, no history of recent puberty or pregnancy. Patient had menarche at 13 years, menstrual cycle regular 4 days every month, moderate flow, no history of recent menstrual irregularities. Is it necessary to ask menstrual history in so detail? Yes sir, thyroid hormones do play a role in the regulation of menstrual cycle, and though the alterations in the cycle may not be specific in toxicosis or myxedema, history of recent menstrual irregularities calls for a more careful examination and investigation for abnormalities of thyroid hormones. No history of similar swelling in the family or village. What does that tell? Sir, family history of goiter suggests a genetic factor with enzyme deficiency which manifests itself as goiter whenever iodine intake is low. Incidence of thyroid swelling in the area or village strongly suggests deficiency of iodine in diet and water as seen in the Himalayan ranges. The endemic goiters are due to deficiency and sporadic goiters are due to goitrogens. Which are the goitrogens that you know of? Vegetables like cabbage containing thiocyanate, the anti-tuberculous drug PAS, anti-thyroid drugs, and excessive iodine intake. For example, asthmatics taking excess of expectorants. Alright. No history of similar swelling in the family or village. No history of taking anti-tuberculous drugs. No history of irradiation to neck in childhood. Significance. Irradiation to neck in childhood can result in a follicular carcinoma of thyroid at a later age. No history of previous medical or surgical treatment taken for the swelling. On examination, start with the local examination. On inspection, what are the methods of inspecting a thyroid swelling? The inspection is carried out with the patient sitting upright on a stool with slightly hyperextended neck. If the neck is short or fat, the thyroid can be made more prominent to inspection by Pizillo's method. The patient clasps her hands behind the occiput and throws her head backwards, pressing the occiput against the resistance of the hands. So, what are your findings? On inspection, there is a single oval swelling 3 by 2 centimeters in size to the right of the midline of neck, half centimeters from the midline, and 1 centimeter above the medial end of the clavicle. It has a smooth surface and a well-defined margin. Which thyroid swellings have an uneven surface? For multinodular goiter, which has a characteristic bosselated surface, and carcinoma. Where do you get a single nodule? Considering the function as recorded on a scan, a single nodule may be a hyperfunctioning or hot nodule in toxic adenoma, a warm nodule with normal gland function in a functioning adenoma, and a cold nodule in benign adenomas, cysts, hemorrhagic nodules, calcified nodules, and papillary carcinoma. Sometimes a multinodular goiter with a single large nodule also clinically gives an impression of a single nodule. Then how do you differentiate it? If along with the nodule, the rest of the thyroid gland is not palpable, it is clinically considered as a solitary nodule, and if the rest of the thyroid can be palpated, then it is clinically a multinodular goiter with single large nodule. And that means normally the thyroid gland is not palpable. That's right, sir, except that its presence can be indirectly detected by inability to palpate second, third and fourth tracheal rings due to the presence of the isthmus. In which conditions is thyroid gland diffusely enlarged and palpable? Sir, diffuse parenchymatous goiter like the puberty goiter, diffuse colloid goiter, primary toxic goiter and Hashimoto's disease. The overlying skin is normal, there is no redness, scars or sinuses. The swelling rises on deglutition but not on protrusion of the tongue, and when it rises, the lower border of the swelling is distinctly visible. Why does the swelling rise upon deglutition? Because it is enclosed by the pretracheal fascia, which fixes it to the laryngeal cartilages, which are elevated during deglutition by the superior constrictor of pharynx. Does this finding confirm the swelling as thyroid? No, sir. It only means that the swelling is enclosed by or fixed to the pretracheal fascia. Thyroid is the commonest, but the other swellings that move on deglutition are thyroglossal cyst, subhyoid bursitis, pretracheal and prelaryngeal lymph nodes, and extrinsic carcinoma of larynx. Any other fallacy of this test? Yes, sir. Some swellings may arise from the thyroid but do not move on deglutition. For example, a retrosternal goiter, a very large goiter, and fixity to surrounding structures, especially the strap muscles, due to inflammation as in chronic thyroiditis or malignant infiltration in carcinoma of thyroid. Did the swelling rise on protrusion of tongue? No, sir. Why did you do this test? To rule out thyroglossal cyst. Is the swelling in midline? No, sir, it is to the right of the midline. Then was it necessary to do this test? Yes, sir, because at the level of the thyroid cartilage, the thyroglossal cyst is always lateral, usually to the left of the midline. Why? Because the thyroid cartilage is angulated anteriorly. Hence, during development, the thyroglossal tract is swept to one side. However, above the thyroid cartilage, the thyroglossal cyst is strictly in midline. Why does thyroglossal cyst move upon protrusion of the tongue? Because it is connected by the thyroglossal duct to the foramen cecum of the tongue. How will you confirm the finding? Ask the patient to open the mouth, hold the swelling between fingers, and ask her to put out and withdraw the tongue without closing the mouth. An upward tug can be felt. There are no visible pulsations. On palpation from behind by standard method and by Lahey's method, no local rise of temperature. What is the standard method for palpating thyroid? Stand behind the patient with the patient sitting at a lower level on a stool. Encircle the neck with the palms, with the index fingers under the chin and the thumbs over the occiput. Keep the neck slightly flexed and slightly inclined to the side being examined and palpate. Asking the patient to swallow helps to confirm the upward movement of the swelling and to appreciate smaller nodules. Why do you flex the neck slightly? To relax the sternomastoids and the deep cervical fascia. Why do you palpate from behind? Firstly, it is anatomically convenient with the hollow of the palm fitting over the convexity of the neck without extending the wrist. Secondly, position of the head can be manipulated and kept in flexion between the index fingers under the chin and thumbs over the occiput. Whereas, if palpated from front, the patient tends to extend the neck and the clavicle comes in the way of palpating the lower pole. And Lahaye's method of palpation? Sir, Lahaye's method is for proper palpation of individual lobes of the thyroid, especially the posteromedial surface which lies in the tracheoesophageal groove and is normally inaccessible to palpation. Stand in front of the patient. The thumb of one hand is pressed against the side of the upper part of trachea and the thyroid cartilage, pushing these structures laterally till the patient shows some discomfort, so that the opposite lobe becomes prominent and is pushed out of the tracheoesophageal groove. Now fingers of the other hand are insinuated behind the gland from behind the sternomastoid to palpate the posteromedial surface, especially for deeply situated nodules which are not felt from in front. On palpation, no local rise of temperature, no tenderness. The swelling has a smooth surface, firm consistency and a well-defined border. Which thyroid swellings have a firm consistency? Nodular goiter, primary toxic goiter and tense cysts. And which ones are soft? Physiological goiter, parenchymatous goiter and colloid goiter. And hard, papillary and follicular carcinoma of thyroid. Plus stony hard consistency is characteristic of serous carcinoma of thyroid, Riedl's thyroiditis, long-standing calcified nodule and long-standing cases of Hashimoto's and de Quervain's diseases. Go ahead. The borders. The lateral border is deep to sternomastoid. The lower border is 1 centimeter above the clavicle and the tracheal rings can be palpated in the suprasternal notch below the isthmus. Why did you palpate the tracheal rings in the suprasternal notch? To rule out the presence of a retrosternal extension. What is the clinical importance of knowing the presence of a retrosternal extension? So it is a relative contraindication to medical treatment as the initial increase in the size of the gland on starting antithyroid drugs may compress the trachea in the thoracic inlet and cause respiratory embarrassment. Also, it is an indication for early surgery because delay means increase in the size of the swelling and more difficult surgery. What are the types of a retrosternal goiter? Substernal, plunging and intrathoracic. Substernal type when it is palpable in the neck, plunging type when it is behind the sternum but is pushed into the neck whenever intrathoracic pressure rises as while coughing, and the intrathoracic type which is entirely within the superior mediastinum. Which types of goiters show retrosternal extension? Adenoma of thyroid and multinodular goiters. You said that this swelling was deep to sternomastoid. Can a swelling superficial to sternomastoid be arising from thyroid? No sir, never, because the firm and strong deep cervical fascia which encloses the sternomastoids will never allow a thyroid swelling to grow superficial to it. Proceed. The rest of the thyroid gland is not palpable. What does it mean? That means this is clinically a solitary nodule. If rest of the thyroid gland was palpable, it would clinically have been considered as a multinodular goiter with a single large nodule. Yes, but remember that there is no hard and fast rule like that. It is just a clinical generalization because many of the clinically solitary nodules are found to be multinodular on sectioning the operative specimen. Go ahead. No fixity to skin. Platysma sign is negative. What is platysma sign? Ask the patient to turn the neck towards the opposite side. If platysma is infiltrated by or fixed to the swelling, it will stand out as longitudinal folds in the skin in the direction of the muscle. No fixity to skin and platysma, no restriction of mobility in the horizontal or vertical direction, no palpable thrill, which is a characteristic of primary thyrotoxicosis due to hypervascularity of the gland, particularly noticeable over the upper poles. How did you feel for it? I stood behind the patient and kept the hand lightly over the swelling and over the upper poles. The hand must be held lightly, otherwise transmitted pulsations of carotid artery will be felt. Carotid artery pulsations are well felt and equal on both the sides, but displaced slightly backwards on the right side. What is this sign known as? Berry's sign. It states that benign enlargements of thyroid merely displace the carotid tree backwards and outwards, so the carotid pulsations are felt behind the posterior edge of the swelling. Whereas malignant infiltration of a carcinoma of thyroid engulfs the carotid tree, so the carotid pulsations are weakly felt or not felt at all. Which other signs are indicative of malignancy? Rapidly enlarging painless nodule, rapid enlargement of a long-standing nodule, or appearance of a new nodule in a patient above 40 years of age, hard consistency, loss of mobility or restriction of mobility, difficulty in feeling carotid pulsations, Horner syndrome, tracheal obstruction or hoarseness of voice, and hard lymphadenopathy. The trachea is slightly displaced to the left. Cocker's test is negative. How do you demonstrate the Cocker's test? Ask the patient to extend the neck and take deep breaths through open mouth. Now compress the lobes from both the sides. Stridor indicates tracheal obstruction, that is positive Cocker's test. What is stridor? Stridor is the shrill, harsh sound produced by passage of air through partially obstructed airway. Where do you get a positive Cocker's test? Typically demonstrated in the scammard trachea of a long-standing multinodular goiter, where, due to tracheomalacia, the tracheal rings are soft and get compressed during the Cocker's test. It may also be seen in tracheal obstruction due to malignancy and Riedel's thyroiditis. What is scabbard trachea? Scabbard means the sheath of a sword. In long-standing large multinodular goiters, the trachea is compressed from both the sides and is gradually converted into an antero-posterior slit. Why does the thyroid press upon trachea and esophagus when it has plenty of space to grow anteriorly? Sir, the anterior layer of pretracheal fascia is very strong and it prevents the anterior growth of the gland, whereas the posterior layer of the fascia is thin and flimsy and provides the line of least resistance. Hence, the thyroid grows backwards and indents into the trachea. On percussion, the note over the manubrium sterna is resonant. Why? Because of the underlying trachea. In presence of a retrosternal goiter, it becomes impaired or dull. On auscultation, no systolic bruit over the swelling and over the upper poles of the thyroid. Right. Now, after the local examination, we look for the signs of thyrotoxicosis, myxedema, retrosternal extension, and metastasis. Proceed. So there are no signs of thyrotoxicosis, that is, no true or apparent exophthalmos. Von Graff's and Geoffroy's sign are negative. No tremors of the outstretched hands or protruded tongue. The skin is normal. Pulse is not fast, irregular or bounding. How did you look for exophthalmos? First, ask the patient to sit straight and look horizontally forwards, that is, at a far point at eye level. Normally the lower lid margin just touches the limbus at 6 o'clock. In presence of true exophthalmos, sclera is seen between the limbus and the lower lid margin. Secondly, examine by Knapziger's method. With the patient sitting on a stool, stand behind her with a hand over the forehead, drawing the hair out of the way, and inspect the eyeballs from above in line with the forehead. Actual bulging of the eyeballs can be appreciated by this method. Why does this bulging occur? Due to excessive deposition of fat in the retrobulbar space, plus in late stages intraorbital edema. What is apparent exophthalmos? Widening of the palpebral fissure due to retraction of the upper eyelid, giving a false appearance of exophthalmos without actual bulging of the eyeballs. How do you differentiate it from true exophthalmos? When the patient looks horizontally forwards, sclera is seen between the upper lid margin and the limbus at 12 o'clock, but the lower lid margin is in normal position. And examination by Knapziger's method shows that there is no actual bulging of the eyeballs. Which is the first sign to appear in exophthalmos? Von Graff's sign of lead lag. What is it? First, fix the patient's head with one hand, then hold the index finger of the other hand at a distance of 18 inches from the patient's eyes and ask him to look at it as the finger is moved vertically up and down rapidly. Look for the lagging behind of the upper eyelid when the finger is moved downwards. Can you now tell the various signs of exophthalmos in the order that they appear? So the first signs to appear are Von Graff's sign of lid lag and widening of the palpebral fissure due to lid retraction. With moderate exophthalmos, there is actual bulging of the eyeballs as demonstrated by Knapziger's method, and Geoffroy's sign becomes positive, that is, absence of wrinkling of the forehead on looking upwards with the head bent downwards. With severe exophthalmos, the bulging of the eyeball increases further. There is intraorbital congestion, raised intraocular tension, and ophthalmoplegia with positive Mobius sign, that is, difficulty in convergence when the patient is asked to look at a near object. What is progressive exophthalmos? Sir, it is a condition where the exophthalmos continues to increase relentlessly after an otherwise successful treatment of thyrotoxicosis. Acuity of vision decreases with chemosis in conjunctiva, impaired sensations and ulcers on cornea, and muscular paresis, giving rise to exophthalmic ophthalmoplegia. Can you differentiate between exophthalmos and a bulging of eyeball due to a retroorbital tumor? Yes, sir. The upper eyelid can be everted with ease in case of a retroorbital mass displacing the eyeball, but it is impossible or difficult to evert in thyrotoxicosis. How do you look for tremors? Ask the patient to stretch out her arms horizontally forwards, with forearm pronated and fingers spread lightly. Watch for fine tremors of the fingers. Secondly, ask her to open her mouth and protrude the tongue slightly without touching the teeth or the lips and hold it there for 30 seconds. Watch for the fibrillary twitchings of the tongue. There are no signs of myxedema, that is, no thickening of skin, edema of legs and face, hoarse voice and mental lethargy. There are no signs of retrosternal extension. What are the signs of retrosternal extension? On inspection, dilated veins over the chest wall, puffiness of face. On palpation, inability to palpate tracheal rings in the suprasternal notch. On percussion, dull note over manubrium sterni. Elevation of both the arms above the head produces respiratory distress or congestion of face, and presence of Horner's syndrome. What is Horner's syndrome? Sir, it is the syndrome resulting from compression of the cervical sympathetic C8 and fibers from T1. It is characterized by constricted pupil, ptosis and narrowing of the palpebral fissure, enophthalmos or recession of the eyeballs, reddening of the conjunctiva due to dilatation of blood vessels after loss of sympathetic vasoconstrictor supply, absence of ciliospinal reflex, and anhidrosis, that is loss of sweating on the affected side of the face. To repeat, constricted pupil, ptosis, enophthalmos, reddening of the conjunctiva, absence of ciliospinal reflex, and anhidrosis. There are no signs of metastasis, that is, cervical lymph nodes are not enlarged, no hard swellings over the scalp, chest is normal, no bony tenderness or deformity, per abdomen, liver is not palpable, no free fluid. My diagnosis is benign, non-toxic, solitary thyroid nodule with no retrosternal extension and no airway obstruction. Investigations: complete blood count, ESR, blood urea, blood sugar, ECG for extrasystoles and fibrillations, X-ray chest for metastasis, X-ray neck, AP and lateral for deviation and compression of trachea and for calcification in thyroid as seen in follicular carcinoma and old hemorrhagic nodules. Specific investigation: sleeping pulse rate, indirect laryngoscopy and thyroid function tests. Sleeping pulse rate gives clinical judgment of the degree of thyrotoxicosis. Up to 90 per minute mild, 90 to 110 per minute moderate, more than 110 per minute is considered as severe thyrotoxicosis. It should be counted in early morning 4 or 5 am, that is about 2 hours before the scheduled time of the patient to get up without disturbing the patient. Indirect laryngoscopy for vocal cord movements is medico-legally important and should be performed even if the voice is normal, because gradual onset unilateral recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy is well compensated and there may be no noticeable change in the voice. Then the thyroid function tests. First, to assess the amount of thyroid hormones in serum by protein-bound iodine and charcoal T3 uptake test, thus giving the free thyroxine index. If available, radioimmunoassay of serum T3, T4 and free T4. Second, radioactive I-131 uptake studies with T3 suppression test if results are equivocal. Third, thyroid scan to demonstrate which parts of the gland are functioning and which are non-functioning. And fourth, aspiration biopsy of the nodule. Older tests which are not done now: basal metabolic rate, serum cholesterol and measurement of tendon reflexes.